Here within Are We There Yet? I enjoy the opportunity to speak with truly the most exciting companies in all of transportation and mobility. And an area that I am especially excited about is remote operation. And so within today's episode, we're going to explore just that, remote operation for logistics vehicles. And to answer that question for us is a leader in the space and one of my favorite companies in all of transportation and mobility, Phantom Auto. Phantom Auto is truly revolutionizing the logistic vehicles world. They enable people to remotely control vehicles across sites from thousands of miles away with just the click of a button. What are some of the advantages of this incredible technology? Well, it enables organizations to tap into labor anywhere with the click of a button, connect people with jobs that need to be filled, and to truly revolutionize operator safety and comfort. And to speak with us today from Phantom Auto and to answer this exciting Are We There Yet question is Phantom Auto's Vice President of Sales, Ryan Clifford, and Phantom Auto's Head of Remote Operations, Sam Hyman. And so I'm really excited to get into it. I understand the idea, I understand the concept, but I'm really curious today to find out if it's truly happening. So, Ryan, if I may ask you, remote operation for logistic vehicles, are we there yet?
Yeah. Hey, thanks, Grant. The short answer is yes. We have the customers that we work with, they have this problem. It's not a problem where the workers that they have, so forklift operators, material handlers, aren't great at their job. Like, that's not the issue. Yeah. Forklift operators, good ones, are very, very good. The issue is that in the areas where they're needed, it's typically there's kind of geographic hotspots. And they're in really short supply. And so what we do is we try to pair workers where they're available to the places where they're really needed. And back to your question, the answer is yes. On a day-to-day basis, we're operating in production. We have sites internationally and here in the States where we're operating from, truly thousands of miles away. A few weeks back, here in the States, we have operators operating from Israel and the Middle East that are driving vehicles here in the United States. So it is in fact real. It's happening every day in production for our customers.
Wow. That I can't believe that. That's incredible. What an exciting time that we live in. And thanks to organizations like yours, Phantom Auto, that are making it happen. And it kind of blows my mind today to hear that, yes, in fact, we are there yet, and that you've taken this concept and technology and developed it into something today that you're doing. Sam's, operating vehicles across the world from multiple sites, and that makes a lot of sense. That it's really, in direct response for the incredible forklift drivers that are out there, and really enabling them to do more and to increase safety and some of the things that you touched on already. So exciting to hear, that we are in fact there. I'd love to learn a little bit more about, how you got there, how the organization, got there. I'm so excited to hear, yes, we are there yet. Can you help kind of, set the stage a little bit, if you will? Would you mind maybe, first, Ryan, tell me a little bit, about your background and kind of what led you to Phantom Auto?
Yeah, it's funny. My story with Phantom goes back further than whenever I actually ended up joining. I've been in this industry my entire career. So different types of technologies for supply chain and logistics. Previously, like when I started my career, about the first roughly 10 years, I was with a company that worked on the transportation side. So all the trucks that are driving to the distribution centers and warehouses that we work in here at Phantom. And I heard about Phantom probably in 2017, maybe 2018. And just with that transportation background, and what Phantom was trying to do at the time was do remote operations for on-highway vehicles, like say like a fleet of robo-taxis or a fleet of autonomous 18-wheeler type of trucks. And I saw that, and thinking back to my experience in the transportation side was just totally blown away. I was like, I cannot believe this. A friend of mine, through an investor, kind of introduced me to them then, tabled it, basically forgot about it. And then I got engaged with Phantom in 2020. And at the time, I was with a company called Fetch Robotics in the AMR space, or autonomous mobile robots. And that was an exciting business that was ultimately acquired. The challenge that I kept running into there, though, it's the limited, not a limitation of Fetch, by the way, which is one of the top tier players in that space, just a limitation of that technology. We would start with a really big, exciting project. And then often by the time you whittled it down to what was actually possible, due to safety restrictions and OSHA restrictions and the ANSI standards. Before you knew it, this exciting project turned into something that was, maybe 10% of what you'd originally set out to do.
Yeah.
So when I heard about Phantom and how they had pivoted from that on highway into the warehouse, working with material handling vehicles, I was super excited because I saw like just all the business that we had to turn down when I was in the AMR space that could easily be captured and that we could really excel with at Phantom, just for that last little piece, like having a human behind the wheel, using human judgment made all the difference in making Phantom that much more deployable. And so now I've been here for about 2.5 years, and I lead our sales team, and it's been super exciting. We're partnered with some of the best customers you could ever ask for in the space, and really starting to take off.
Absolutely. It is taken off. And that's funny you use the same wording. I mean, blew your mind. It absolutely blew my mind when I first heard about it. And I know for many of the audience members and companies out there hearing this today and you confirming that we're there yet, you're doing it today, right now in 2023, is incredible. And appreciate you sharing some of that journey yourself, to Phantom Auto. Sam, thank you so much for taking the time today to speak within Are We There Yet? And really excited, if I may, to ask about your story and kind of what led you to Phantom Auto. Would you mind sharing with us?
Absolutely, Grant. Thank you very much for having us. It's great to be here. I've been working in robotics for the past 6 years. I joined Phantom a couple of years ago, initially on the deployment side and the customer success side, working with our customers to get these units into the field. Now I've transitioned over to run our remote operations group, which has just been really exciting and really thrilling to see everything we've been able to accomplish in the last, 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, 24 months since I joined.
Yeah.
One of the things that really attracted me to Phantom is that there are things robots do well and there are things humans do well, and we should let each do what they do best. A dynamic live environment like a logistics space that's constantly changing, constantly moving, that's really hard for an AGV. But for a human logging in remotely, that's an easy solve. And so that's one of the things that makes Phantom so exciting for me.
You've mentioned the term, remote operation, and I'm certainly familiar with the term and those in the industry, but could you maybe apply it, to the world of logistics? How exactly does remote operation in logistics work exactly? Would you mind maybe telling us a little bit more about that, Sam?
Absolutely. So remote operations just decouples labor from location. We've got a group of remote operators who work in central centers, with robust, redundant internet connections to make sure we maintain connectivity. They're sitting, behind a computer with essentially a steering wheel and pedals, as if a video game console, and they can drive any, logistics vehicle wherever it needs to be driven. Right now, we're doing a lot of work with forklifts and yard trucks, and that's been really exciting.
And Sam, to compare that, like by contrast, for the past, let's call it 80 years, when like distribution had like kind of started the way that we know it today, you only have access to the labor that are commuting distance to your facility, right? And typically the location of those facilities, it's not determined by where the labor is. It's determined by where your customers are, and then you have to have that facility within distance to get your products to your customers in an efficient manner. And very often, like I said before, the same places where you need to be, your competitors need to be, and your industry counterparts need to be too. So you're all competing for that same pool of labor of people that are within commuting distance to your building. It just totally flips that on its head when you can access people.
Yeah, you've done just that. You flipped the whole industry on its head in a very good way. Would you mind telling us? I'm really fascinated by the types of vehicles already that you're operating. You said we're there yet. I'd be really curious to learn a little bit more about some of those already in operation. Can you tell us a little bit more about those vehicles, Ryan?
Yeah. So, where we started with on-highway vehicles, we still do some work in yard trucks. Mm-hmm. So it's basically the same kind of vehicle format as you would have on highway with like an 18-wheeler. The big difference is that they're restricted to a private property, to like a trucking yard that's owned by whoever that customer is, which changes all the regulations compared to actually being out on the open highway. So we do still do some of those projects. We're partnered with a really great partner there, a company called Con Global, it's truly a juggernaut in that space. But But most of our focus on internally, at least, is on material handling. So we're working with forklifts, pallet jacks. We're adding clamp trucks here this quarter. The first one actually is going out here in the next couple of weeks.
Wow.
We're working in refrigerated environments now. So you can be in a cooled warehouse where you're moving fresh foods, which is a really difficult environment for any type of automation. And so it's actually what they call cold chain has always been a really kind of a very traditional type of environment. Despite the industry trying to move towards a lot of new innovative solutions, it's just really difficult to deploy in, 30 degrees or 22 degrees, or in some cases, negative 10 degrees. And so that's a space that we've been able to operate in. And then we're also, more basic, just working on just a standard counterbalance vehicle, a counterbalance forklift vehicle, which is going to be the kind of the bread and butter of most people's operations. And there's, hundreds of thousands of those vehicles in the market.
Yeah. Wow. It sounds like the portfolio of vehicles that are in operation is expanding every day. That's really exciting to hear. I'm familiar with a few other, technologies out there, solutions, to some of the same issues, the automated guided vehicles, AGV, autonomous mobile robots, AMRs. Could you maybe tell us a little bit more, Ryan, about how your solution differs from some of these other technologies or solutions out there?
I think the biggest difference is the extent that they are deployable and nimble, right? I mean, the thing with robotics, when you deploy robotics, you have to pretty much proactively design the solution for all the scenarios that are going to come up. But if something comes up on a given day that you didn't proactively design for, it can't function. Where in the case of Phantom, we have that ability to adjust on the fly. Maybe today is a really high volume day, but tomorrow is going to be a low volume day. And we just talk with the operation and sort it out in real time. The other piece in terms of, that ability to be nimble, it's also the operating environments. So with, I spoke to it earlier about kind of the restrictions from the ANSI regulations and safety regulations at OSHA of having robotic vehicles, is that they require things like particularly wide aisle widths. And the reason for that is, so if you're driving down an aisle and this is a robot that's operating freely on its own, if something were ever to cross its path, it needs plenty of stopping distance by the time it sees that vehicle to safely come to a stop.
Yeah.
In our case, we can work with the drivers to understand those scenarios. This is actually really Sam's department. He can extrapolate here, but we can work with them to understand those scenarios. So we can limit some of those restrictions and then actually rely on our drivers to be able to operate in areas like a little bit more narrow aisles or inside of trailers, where it's really challenging for robots to operate.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Yeah. I know that as a result of our conversation today and every day, there are new organizations that are reaching out to Phantom Auto that are intrigued with your solution, as I certainly am, and are excited to sign up and to start working with you and starting to implement, some of these advantages within their own organizations. Can you kind of walk us through the onboarding process with, a new client and kind of some of the initial steps in working with Phantom Auto?
Yeah, Sam, I'll let you do that one. Sam is our head of remote operations, but he actually started us in that very part of the organization. So he has a lot of firsthand experience there.
Great.
Absolutely. The first thing we do whenever we look to work with a new customer is a site visit. We want to meet with your team and understand what workflows you're currently doing, what workflows what are the workflows where we can be the most effective for you. Then we work closely with IT departments. We end up doing a network survey as well, make sure that we have comprehensive coverage across the facility. Then you've got our great customer success team that stays with the customer throughout the deployment process. From the day we initially meet, start planning those workflows to when we're operating live in your facility.
Very good. I love to hear that, Sam. I mean, a true partnership, and the client sounds like doesn't necessarily need to come in with all of their ideas for integrating the technology and solutions. It sounds like it's a very collaborative process, even from day one, and you kind of taking a look at the operations and Phantom Auto really analyzing, where the solutions will best fit within the company.
Absolutely. We've come into several customers where we thought we were going to start with one workflow. And as we, some, other departments within the warehouse said, hey, maybe that's something that we could use over here. And that's been really, really dynamic and really rewarding for us.
Yeah.
It's been out of necessity because the challenging thing is, Steve Jobs once said and took some heat for it, like customers don't even know what they want. And we're kind of in a similar paradigm because remote operations is entirely uncharted territory. So our customers come to us, they're like, hey, like we see the value of the value proposition of applying labor where it's available into the places where we really need it, but we don't really know where to start. So it is very collaborative, and they do tend to lean on us maybe more than they would for some other technologies where they have some experience or background.
Yeah. So it sounds like, kind of speaking to your point there, that initial kind of network evaluation mapping process is a really important part of working with a new partner.
Absolutely, it is. We want to make sure that once the vehicles arrive, they're going to be able to operate smoothly in all areas of the warehouse. One of the great benefits of Phantom is that we have our bonding solution. We use both LTE and Wi-Fi and 5G, so we can operate anywhere within the warehouse, and whichever signal is best is the signal that's used at that moment. So it allows us to operate smoothly in poor network environments, which has been really advantageous for our customers.
Yeah. You shared a little bit about some of the advantages of your solution versus other technologies in terms of just less infrastructure requirements, like to be set up on the front end as some of the other technologies or solutions require. So kind of building upon that a little bit, do new partners have to make some significant infrastructure changes within their organizations or investments to deploy Phantom? I'd be curious to hear how you really kind of align with their kind of existing operations process. You mind maybe speaking to that a little bit?
Absolutely. No, they don't need to make any improvements. As I mentioned, because we've got this bonding solution, even in places where the Wi-Fi network may not be as robust as others, we can fall back on LTE, and it allows us to operate in those places without making those large infrastructure investments.
Okay, so it sounds like you make it really easy, don't require really any or any major, significant infrastructure, and you got kind of the networking solution, integrated already. So would ask you maybe, Ryan, so a client's, ready to go. How long does it typically take to get up and running with Phantom Auto?
Well, I will tell you, our goal is that we can be operating the day that it arrives. So the day the vehicle arrives, and mind you, there are some dependencies here, the customer, if something comes up and they're not able to facilitate or whatever the case may be, but 9 times out of 10, we are able to start doing production moves on that first day. I will say, that like when I think of like what Sam was talking about is like the infrastructure that's required in order to operate, which is extremely light with Phantom. Mm-hmm. The other side where we actually tend to dive deeper is operationally, right? Like at the same time they're onboarding Phantom, like we're onboarding them too. It's really a mutual onboarding. So, who are we talking to? Like we have this advantage where we have a human operator there. So when things change in real time, we're able to be nimble and flexible and adjust. Mm-hmm. But we do have to really we have to put in the effort to establish the right communication channels. So like that, like who should be communicating with who there. It's tactical. But then there's also like project managers, and then there's corporate expectations. And then like what channels even, which is kind of a simple thing, but we have some that are communicating with us on Slack, or some that are communicating through their WMS, or others that'll send us a text message. And just establishing those things on the front end. So there's a really open line of communication has proved to be very, very important to success, once we get into like that steady state of operations.
Yeah. Well, again, I think that says a lot about the partnership, that you provide, through Phantom Auto, and it's the infrastructure and the technology and all of the wireless systems and everything that are part of it, but also really kind of integrating the solution and the new advantages that they'll soon realize, operationally, makes a lot of sense. And I think just really speaks to the partnership. And I can't, you blow my mind again. I can't believe that, that in some cases, they're put right into operation on day one. I can think of a lot of products, not only in business, but in my personal life that I am certainly not using, the second that it arrives at my home. So that's amazing to hear that your solution is one that in many cases is ready to go. And so would be curious. So they've got the vehicle, the processes are set up. You've completed, onboarding, with a new client. Can you maybe speak a little bit more to, exactly what happens when the vehicles are delivered to the customer site? Are they kind of already optimized, for specific environments? Can you kind of walk us through, okay, once you've completed onboarding, the systems are in place, kind of what happens at that point, Sam?
Absolutely. Once we get the vehicle on site, we go through a series of acceptance testing, and then also network optimization once we get the vehicle there. And we want to make sure that everything performs in the best way possible. And there's a lot of configurations that we can adjust to make sure that we're performing optimally and driving in the best way possible. We do some performance tests. We start working with the on-site team to really go through, some test workflows of making sure, okay, this is what we've talked about. Now let's see how this works in practice. Let's go through this a couple times and make sure that everyone in the facility is on the same page. There's also a lot of excitement usually when we get there on the first day, and so there's a lot of show and tell with local folks on site. Everyone's excited to see these units there, and a lot of folks have questions which we're happy to answer. One of the things we do that we can speak to a bit more later is we have a Phantom field specialist that is stationed at each one of our customer sites. And in addition to liaising with the local site and making sure that everything is optimized and making sure that there's free-flowing communication, they're a great resource there for folks who've got questions. And a lot of folks do, and they're excited to see it working.
Yeah. Alex, it is a very exciting time. I can only imagine. It's like, us getting a new car, the company's getting a new car, and this new car has capabilities unlike anything that they've ever operated before. So I can imagine it's a really fun and exciting time for new Phantom Auto partners. Can you tell us about, some of the people that are involved, at this stage and ongoing with the client, who Phantom Auto has, working with customers at this time? Maybe tell us a little bit more, about some of the support personnel, who are working with customers during and after deployment. I know that, your team members are a big part of everything that's happening at Phantom Auto. Would you mind maybe, Ryan, telling us a little bit about, some of these people working with clients?
Yeah, well, I'll say a little bit about customers first. Some are confidential, but some that are public. CJ Logistics is a top 10 3PL in North America, and actually one of the largest globally. They're a customer of ours, and they're now expanded to 3 sites. We started with them in January. Things went well. And then over the summer, they expanded to 3 sites, and we're continuing that expansion across their network. Maersk is another customer. And the majority of the others are confidential, but also NFI and ArcBest. And I think, really simply put, the majority of them have just been so blown away that it works, that it works as advertised, right? Wow, not only does it work, but it worked right away. It didn't require weeks of tinkering to get it working. Has been the thing that I think has surprised the most customers. And then right there, then it builds a lot of credibility. And then it becomes, just how do we tweak this? How do we change the way we communicate, the way that we're working operationally, make sure that we're staffed at the times when you're the busiest versus when the times when you have downtime and things like that, which are all human pieces and totally within our control. Once the technology became steady state, that just changed everything. Now we're partnering with our customers to get the most out of the vehicles, to utilize them the most. In terms of the number of hours, we have customers, CJ Logistics, they want it to be running for 22 hours a day. And then when they're running, to make sure that they're utilized most efficiently. And so that's really where we spend the bulk of our time and where we're seeing the most success.
Yeah. Those are some big names in a few different industries that you've just shared with us. And I think that is all the credibility in the world that these industry-leading organizations are using Phantom Auto. And as you said, it really, really does work. And it's fascinating. And I think it is just such a cool, game-changing solution and technology for companies that we know works. And other industry-leading organizations are out there using it every single day throughout the entire day. But it is so cool and so amazing that you do kind of have to scratch, and ask yourself, does it really work? And you kind of are blown away again when it is confirmed that it does really work. So I think just the technology is that, truly industry changing and that amazing and that incredible. So it's got to be a lot of fun for you guys to be working with an organization with that kind of just disrupting technology that even when you've heard people talk about it, you're kind of amazed once again to kind of see it in action again and kind of, get to shout it. It really, really works. So that's really cool. I imagine there's some level of training, that goes into this. Can you tell us a little bit, about the training and support that Phantom offers after deployment? Ryan, would love to hear a little bit about that.
Well, I think that this goes back to that, and I'm actually going to let Sam elaborate on it, but I think it goes back a bit to it's really like that mutual onboarding. Mm-hmm. Like so much of this is about, Sam is working with leaders that are, working between our customers and then working between our remote operations teams. And it's really largely about, making sure that each side understands each other, so that the operation knows that like the workflows that we're working on and the throughput expectations. And if there's any very specific, like company specific or site specific mandates, we have some customers that they have particular rules about operating in their buildings kind of globally across all their buildings. And then they might have some things that are very specific to that site or specific to, behaviors that happen on their loading docks as opposed to inside of their buildings. And so we really need to know all of those things in order for the remote operators and the managers to effectively manage and deploy the teams. But that's right in Sam's wheelhouse. So hopefully I teed you up there, Sam.
Well, thank you very much for that, Ryan. And absolutely, there's definitely a back and forth and active line of communication between us and the local operations staff. We work closely with them to ensure that all local processes and procedures are adhered to. It's just like having another driver in your warehouse. We're gonna train our operators to follow all local procedures. Do you turn left here? Do you turn right here? How do you behave on the loading dock? All of those things, while generally universal, a lot of folks have specific requirements for their warehouses, top speeds, things like that. And we train all our personnel to comply with those specific warehouses and processes and procedures.
It's really been exciting to hear about some of the advantages that you offer clients. And I'd be curious to learn a little bit more about how the solution, how Phantom's operator as a service specifically, really improves fleet efficiency for organizations. Sam, would you mind speaking to that a little bit?
Absolutely, Grant. One of the great things about Phantom is that, we can have one of our operators hop onto any vehicle anywhere, so their vehicles don't need to take lunch breaks anymore. You've got someone who's sitting next to our operator or at another one of our facilities who can hop on 5 seconds later when one operator needs to step away.
Yeah. I imagine that, within working with all of the incredible organizations, some of what you've mentioned within the episode today already, but I imagine that there's been some lessons learned, from all of your experience, working with these industry leading clients. Would you mind maybe telling us a little bit about some of the things that you learned supporting previous clients?
Absolutely. We've been live in production and we've learned a lot from all the different clients we've been serving over that time. At this point where we've got our deployments pretty tight and we can be rolling from day one.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Again, speaking to the partnership, that you provide, and really it's an ongoing partnership that really doesn't end. It kind of just begins, when that first vehicle arrives. There's got to be, Sam, and having been there and experienced this firsthand, there's got to be kind of a buzz and kind of an excitement in the air. I mean, I imagine for many of these companies, this is the first time they've even seen a technology or solution, like this. And for many probably veterans of the industry that have, worked in the industry for decades, I'm sure many of them, to see something like this in person for the first time, it's got to be pretty exciting and incredible. I imagine it's a pretty cool environment to be a part of when that first vehicle arrives.
Absolutely. It most definitely is. And one of the things I like most about Phantom is that, you don't have to start from scratch to integrate some technology into your warehouse. We can go into any existing warehouse today and start functioning. It's not that you have to, with, AGVs, other things like that. They work great when you're building a warehouse from scratch and you can design all your systems, your wide aisles to accommodate these type of systems. But there's so many warehouses and group companies out there that have existing facilities and still want to invest in technology and invest in optimization. And that's where Phantom can fit in nicely with those companies.
Yeah. You reminded me about something a little bit, like when we speak to customers just being shocked when they see it and it actually works. I mean, part of that is that we have found a bit of a niche in working in some environments that traditionally have not been automated because they're difficult or challenging environments. And so Like food distribution and grocery are two of our key customers are in those spaces. And it was like we talked about earlier, they're just tough to find automation that'll work in those environments. So, if you go into other sectors of our space, say like e-commerce fulfillment, for example, is a space where there's been literally billions of dollars invested over the past 5 years. That was more the space I was in previously. And they've deployed all kinds of like super exciting and interesting and game-changing types of technology. So they might be perhaps less floored by Phantom when it functions. But when you're in an environment where you're operating clamp trucks, or again, you're in that refrigerated or frozen environment, or you're really even working in like live loads of trailers, those are places where they tend to be very traditional because the technology just hasn't gotten there yet. So I think that lends itself to why it's so surprising. Like, wow, this thing really does work the way you said it was going to work.
It does. It does. I love your choice of wording there too, Ryan. Floored by Phantom. I think that could be a slogan or something like that, because you really are flooring clients on their floors. And so great wording there.
One down. You let me talk for 30 straight minutes and you're bound to get something in there.
That was a good one for sure. Yeah. So
29 seconds.
Yeah. I know that you're all about the continued success of your clients. It starts from day one, and really before that is you're planning and setting things up for the organizations. But you really are all about that continued success for the organization. So can you maybe speak to a little bit, how from, initially working with clients, new clients, even existing clients, how do you continue to set them up for success working with you in Phantom Auto?
Yeah, I can start that one. So it started when we started through the sales process. And once we get to the point where we've each kind of validated each other, there's mutual interest, we think that there's a good fit operationally, then we engage our sales engineering team. And this is a team that's led by a guy who's been on both sides. He's been on the customer side. He's been on the innovation, automation, technology side, really understands like how to practically apply technology like ours.
Yeah.
So he's going to engage first and go look for, kind of validate the opportunity in the real world, go visit the site, understand, is it functionally going to work here? And then two, is it going to actually provide a legitimate business case? If it's a no to either of those, we would rather mutually part ways and agree to, try to re-engage at a later date. It's not in either of our interests to try to fit a square peg in a round hole when it comes to that.
Yeah.
So it really starts at the sales engineers as they try to kind of narrow the scope of what it is we're going to do. Because again, most of our customers have never used anything like remote operations. So we're just trying to rein everybody in a bit. And then it turns over to our customer success team. So we have customer success account managers that are, think about them as like a project manager. So they start also in this kind of pre-deployment and validation phase, and then they're going to be with the customer forever. So they kind of start in scoping the project that's going to happen, initial deployment. And then as our customers go from that initial deployment to the next and the next and the next, that same customer success account manager, by that point, really knows them inside and out. They're effectively a part of our customers team at that point. So they're bringing with them a lot of knowledge as we start to expand to the next site and the next site. And then on the ground, as Sam mentioned, we have what we call a Phantom field specialist that's there on the ground, kind of facilitating the human piece that's required. So it's opening and closing dock doors, facilitating communications on the ground, kind of capturing some of the real-time things that are happening. And that's usually, we consider probably like a 1-to-10 or a 1-to-20 ratio where that Phantom field specialist can support a whole bunch of Phantom driven vehicles. And then ultimately, even a step beyond that is kind of those conversations that are happening at the corporate level. Those are usually with my team. And they're in some respects, they're less important on the tactical side. But we do need to be sure that the tactical side is aligned up with the expectations of the leadership and the executives that are making the decision to choose Phantom to begin with.
Yep. Makes a lot of sense. Yeah. You've answered this question for me within our conversation before, and I was curious for you to kind of just elaborate a little bit more on the level of service that you provide. You've answered that, I think, in so many different ways in terms of just support and the onboarding and design of the processes and the ability to kind of integrate within existing infrastructure. And you've just shared more about how you're always ensuring, that level of continued success. Anything you want to add in terms of, service principles or anything that are really important to Phantom Auto within support of the clients that you work with?
I mean, look, I will say, just anecdotally that these things succeed or fail by what happens in the warehouse. We can have a COO and a CFO and a CEO that love everything about Phantom, but it'll fail or succeed based on whether we're integrating easily and consistently with reliability and stability on the ground. And to the extent that we do that effectively and long-term and build a real partnership there. Because as soon as those same executives that thought that Phantom was such a great business proposition hear from their operating teams that this is more trouble than it's worth, then there's going to be a lot of questions about that value proposition. And we have a whole bunch of advantages to help us. Mostly it's the people, it's the humans that can really enable that. And that's totally within our control. So we've built out a really robust support infrastructure and project management infrastructure and the people like Sam and his teams to make sure that we never let a ball drop there. Technology is really hard. To me, I'm still blown away by the remote operations capabilities and driving a vehicle from the other side of the world. I'm still blown away by it, even though I see it all the time. Mm-hmm. And that's hard. And you might run into a thing that happens. And customers even anticipate that, someday the wind's going to blow a certain direction and connectivity is not going to be great that day, right? Yeah. But the one that's always within our control is supporting our customers, supporting the operations, making sure if something goes wrong that we are all over it, kind of in that white glove service type of fashion. So we've definitely made a huge investment on that side of the house.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really, really, really incredible that you really look at it that way, and that it does have to make sense with the people and on the floor. And you did it again, and make sure that a ball never drops. You've got some incredible analogies relevant to supply chain and logistics vehicles, which I loved, Ryan. So thank you again for that. So I've got to ask, so after speaking to some of that and that continued success, it's so important, within the partnership and so important for Phantom Auto. After vehicles go live, they're starting to operate. How does Phantom Auto really measure success from that point kind of going forward?
Well, we work with the individual sites to define the KPIs that are relevant to them. We track those within our systems and work with our customer success team to report those back to customers on a regular basis. We're constantly looking at those numbers and looking for ways for our team to improve.
Very good. Yeah. One question I'd like, just speaking a little bit of some things happening, within the industry. We know that in logistics today, one of the major issues is the labor shortage, and y'all spoke to that a little bit earlier within our conversation. But this isn't something that we're just seeing right now. It really is kind of a long-standing issue. And so I understand, that the Phantom Auto can really help companies kind of improve, their access to talent, to help solve some of the labor shortages in logistics. Can you please tell us a little bit, more about how you're addressing, this issue that we're seeing within the logistics world?
Yeah, I think it's twofold. One, there's the geographic side that we've talked enough about, where I won't get back into that. But like connecting people where they live, where they're available. They don't have to move to take these jobs, but they can be applied anywhere across the customer's network. And then I think that there's also kind of just like a future-proof side of this too. And that as a material handler, a professional forklift driver, we've heard this from some of our operators, that it's more interesting to be like, I work for a tech company, and I drive vehicles from anywhere in the world, and I can click from one into another in real time. And that's that, I believe that we are, kind of upskilling drivers that have a long-term future. And then on the operational side, similarly, people that maybe were driving those vehicles at a site with a customer on the customer side, there's a lot of opportunities now to, rather than just be like a career-long forklift driver, now you can be that person on the ground who's managing this technology deployment and ensuring that cohesiveness with the technology, the remote operators, and the operation. So we think that, it's kind of multifold, and creating some really new, interesting jobs for people that are going to be, available for decades into the future.
Yeah, very interesting jobs. You certainly are upskilling, the market, and certainly are just addressing just head on, this issue, this labor shortage that we've seen within the industry, and it very much is a solution, as you shared on many fronts, to this. So really excited to hear that. And really, our conversation today, to use your words, Ryan, I'm floored by our conversation, and I'm so excited to hear that we are in fact there, and that Phantom Auto is there and helping companies and clients and partners get there every single day, and that your vehicles are in operation. And it's been really fun, to even hear some stories from the floor from each of you today, Ryan and Sam. So I just really appreciate you taking the time to talk. And I know that there's going to be a lot of companies and individuals out there that, like me, are floored by the conversation and can't believe that this is happening, and will be very excited to integrate your solutions into their organizations. Can you please direct members of the audience to where they can learn more about Phantom Auto and explore partnering with the company?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I'm on LinkedIn, so find me and connect. I'm happy to talk with any customer that's interested in looking at Phantom and get you connected with the right people on our team. And then in terms of email outreach, sales@phantomauto.com is the best way. And that'll come to me and our entire team. And we'll be sure that someone reaches right back out to you right away.
Perfect. And I do encourage everyone out there to visit phantomauto.com. It's an incredible website. I'm a big fan of the videos and solutions that you offer. Big fan of the video podcast series. And I've been very excited leading the conversation to ask the "Are we there yet?" question, and for it to be confirmed by each of you, Ryan and Sam, firsthand that it is happening and that you are doing it. So really appreciate each of you taking the time to stop by Are We There Yet? Really enjoyed our conversation and appreciate your time today.
Thanks a lot, Grant. I appreciate it too. It's been fun.
Thank you, Grant. Great to be here.